So welcome back to the channel, guys. Thanks for all the new subscribers. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying at least some of the content that I have on the channel, because we get into all kinds of things here. So if it's not your thing, just there's got to be something that is your thing, and if there isn't, we'll get to that in the future. So here today I'm talking about an old furnace. This is a Sears, from a Sears furnace, and we have a gas valve here. Some of you might recognize this gas valve. We'll get a good look at it here. And this gas valve is a VR8440A 2001. And it operates on 24 volts AC, which comes from the power supply. And what we have is 120 volts coming in. We have it just plugged into a power strip for testing. We have a relay in here, which we're not using right now. We're just demonstrating the 24 volt side of this gas circuit. So what we have is, back in the day, what they did was, I think it was 91 or 92, they eliminated standing pilots, which would burn continuously. Well, they decided that was a waste of energy because the pilot was running all the time, and so the spark ignition was developed. And how this works is when the furnace calls for heat, and I'm jumping here R and W, which is going to complete the 24 volt circuit. It's going to send 24 volts right here, 24 volts or 25 volts. You know, it's going to range from it, you know, it could go up to 26, 27. I've seen that. It seems okay. And we have 3 connection points here that connect directly to the gas valve. So from the top we have MV, and don't pay attention to the colors, you just got to follow the wire and make sure it goes to the right place. So I'm looking at black, so MV is going to go to TH on this gas valve here. Then we have the white wire, which goes to TR, which is over here. Then finally we have the red wire, which goes to THTR, which is at the top right here. Okay, we have our pilot tube connected. We have the spark igniter, and what's interesting about this one is it's a combination spark, but it also has the ability to read if there's a flame or not. And how it does that is when you, and we're going to test it with a torch, and we're going to heat it up just like what would happen when the furnace sequence starts. If you have an inducer motor, that would start first, of course, after the pressure switch was satisfied and closed, to make sure that the inducer was running. Now this specific furnace didn't have an inducer, but what this will do is it will read in millivolts. It will read that it has a flame, because there's, I think the science behind it is there's 2 different metals in there, so as you heat it, it generates a voltage, and it sends it back to this S86F intermittent pilot controller. And what that does is recognize a flame, so it will switch from PV, which is on when you first initiate the power. The pilot valve's going to open on here. There's 2 different valves in this gas valve here. There's a pilot valve that just supplies gas through this tube to the pilot, and we have the main valve, which is where your manifold would come out, which would go into your burners, and then the burners would fire once the main valve was open. So you have your common wire, MVPV, and then what happens is, once the pilot sends gas here and it sparks, and it recognizes there's an actual flame, then it will switch to the MV terminal here, which will open up the main valve and allow the gas to flow through to the burners. Now it's pretty interesting that, really, if you think about it, this is a safety mechanism, because let's say you didn't have a flame there, all the furnace would do is just open up this pilot valve and gas would be pouring all over the place. It wouldn't have any way of knowing that there was a flame or not. So the engineering behind that is quite magnificent. And we have the coil here, which what would happen is this coil would possibly engage the inducer motor, and then the circuit would go on, you know, through the blower. But this relay here is activated by 24 volts as well. There's a separate 2 terminals for the 24 volts coming in, and the switch is either normally open or normally closed, and closed means there's a connection between the 2 points. Open would mean there is no connection. So as soon as power is applied here, as soon as it's plugged in, it would make a connection there and possibly start the inducer motor. After it went through the pressure switch to make sure that the heat exchanger was clear and that the pipe was clear, your exhaust pipe going outside. So we're going to fire this thing up. And this is old stuff. This is from a Sears furnace. I think it was from, it had to be like late 80s, early 90s. They switched to this, I think maybe mid 90s, to the spark ignition from the standing pilot flame. But I'm going to fire this up, and we're just going to use a torch, and we're just kind of fool it into thinking that there's a flame. Okay, so it's important to note too that if you're getting a spark but you're not getting the flame rectification process or verifying the flame here, and the main valve isn't kicking on, it could be this ground wire here. You have to make sure that ground wire connecting to the ground here on this controller is nice and clean, sanded. Make sure the probe here is sanded lightly. You don't have to get crazy with a 80 grit, just use a fine sandpaper. Clean this all up and try again. And also you might notice that it's just using the same as your car would use. It's just a spark plug wire. Alright, so this is typically what would happen when you set your thermostat higher than the room temperature. It would engage, the spark would start here, the valve for the pilot valve is open now because it's sending gas through this tube up into here, and combined with the spark, a pilot would light. At that point, this probe will sense that a flame is present, and it will switch to the MV terminal here, the main valve, open up the main valve, and it will fire up the burners. So I'm going to fake it out. I'm just going to use this, and we should hear it click to the main valve, and the spark should stop. Did you hear the click? And you see it stopped. Of course, it starts again because it realizes there's no flame anymore, so it's going to retry and try the process again. But this is basically how an intermittent spark controller works in conjunction with the gas valve for an older style furnace. You may even have this still, so hopefully this helps you understand. There is a replacement for this that you can get. I think it's an S8610 or something. I have to verify that model number, but they do have a newer version of this, so don't be afraid if you have an older furnace and you think you can't replace that. You can. You know, you'll be able to replace the gas valve. For me, this is going to be a spare. That's why I wanted to test them out. We're going to turn this off, and I hope this video helped you. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe. We're going to dig into all kind of things here, so Thanks for subscribing again. We'll see you next time.